On today's Visual Studio Toolbox, Maddy is going to show us how to use Visual Studio Code on a Mac to build MAUI apps. Hi, welcome to Visual Studio Toolbox. I'm your host, Robert Green, and joining me today is Maddy Montequila. Hey, Maddy, how are you?
Hey, I am good. How are you?
I'm fantastic. We're going to talk MAUI today.
We are. It's going to be fun.
Specifically, we know that with MAUI, you can build applications that run on multiple platforms. You can also build those applications on multiple platforms like Windows and Mac. But rumor has it that Visual Studio for Mac is being retired. And so the question on everybody's minds is, what's a poor Mac developer, as if there is such a thing, since machines are expensive, what is a Mac developer supposed to do?
Oh, well, I have the answer.
You're going to answer. But before we do that, not that you need any introduction, but why don't you introduce yourself and tell folks who you are?
Who am I? I'm Maddy. I am a product manager on the .NET MAUI team. I was on the Xamarin team, which is actually the same team. So very cool. I am coming up on year 6, which is kind of insane.
Nice.
And lately, for the past year or so, actually, I've been working on what we're going to show today as part of my job. I do a whole bunch of things. But generally, I work in developer productivity, and obviously developing on a Mac is a really big part of the MAUI story. So, yeah.
Cool. So, what have you been working on? What is the answer to the question?
So exciting. So we finally have a Visual Studio Code experience for .NET and .NET MAUI developers. So we've had the C# extension forever, which is amazing. It used to be called OmniSharp. Now it's just C#, and it's open source, and it's this all new language server protocol, LSP, Roslyn-based, beautiful, IntelliSense and autocomplete and all that stuff for C#. We built on top of it, the wonderful Visual Studio team and .NET tooling team built something called C# Dev Kit, which basically gives VS Code the ability to understand a solution file. I know it does more than that, but when I explain it to people, I just think, oh, I can open a .sln or a .csproj, and Visual Studio knows how to look at this. Visual Studio Code knows how to look at this.
Right.
And then we, on top of that, built the MAUI extension, which we're affectionately calling MAUI Dev Kit, even though it's just called .NET MAUI.
Okay.
And that gives you the ability to take that solution or project or whatever it is and pop it onto any of the valid MAUI targets. So Android, iOS, Mac OS, and Windows. Simulators, emulators, physical devices, your local machine, whatever makes sense for your workflow. And it's been fun. So I will show you a little bit about how to get set up, give you some of my tips for VS Code. I know this is Visual Studio Toolbox, so it feels a little weird to be doing VS Code here.
It actually doesn't, because, just my, just what I do is I've done Xamarin, I've done MAUI, and I have a Mac, and I have built MAUI apps on Windows, and I say, well, I want to open that on my Mac and work on it on the Mac. So source code goes into Git, goes down to the Mac, and I open it up previously in Visual Studio for Mac, and I can work in both environments. And now what I think you're telling me is I can now just use Visual Studio Code with the C# Dev Kit and the MAUI extension, and then I can build the app in Windows in Visual Studio, open it in the Mac in Visual Studio Code, or build it on the Mac in Visual Studio Code, open it on Windows in Visual Studio Code or Visual Studio.
Yep. And Linux with VS Code.
Ooh.
You can do Android specifically because it's not a Windows machine, so you can't do Windows development. And it's not a Mac machine, so you can't do Mac or iOS. But you can do Android on Linux. I have seen it done.
Cool.
So, yeah. So all you need to do, if you don't have any of these extensions yet, you don't have to do much. Just search for .NET MAUI and install this one. And it will actually pull in all the dependencies you need. You will notice that this is still in preview. It is still a preview extension. There is one more feature we are hoping to land, which I will talk about before we flip it out of preview. But C# Dev Kit itself is not in preview. That is stable and out there with a couple millions of downloads. Very cool. And we have both pre-release and release versions of everything. So pre-release is weekly, release is monthly-ish.
Okay.
So just a heads up, still in preview. And there's a bunch of instructions here. There's links to the docs, but we don't need to read through those because I'm going to show them to you. We are going to start by just creating a project. So if you open a regular old window with nothing else open in VS Code, it is going to give you this option now in your Explorer to create a .NET project. But if you don't have that option, or if you're in a different window or whatever it is, I'm on my Mac, so it's Command-Shift-P. If you're on your Windows, it's Control-Shift-P. That is how you open the command palette. You can search .NET, or you can search new project, and .NET new project will pop up. So click. And then it's going to give you all the options here. .NET MAUI right up top, definitely because it's the best and not because it starts with a period. I'm going to pick where I want it. So I'm going to put it in my source folder with all my other sample apps, my MAUI app 1 and my MAUI app 2.
And just to be clear, you are on a Mac right now, but
I am.
Experience in Windows is virtually the same UI-wise,
Yes.
right?
Yep, it is pretty much the same, except whenever I say command, you should hit control.
Right.
That's
Okay.
it. So when I name this VS Toolbox Demo, press enter. And so what this is doing is it's just creating the same thing as if I did .NET new MAUI on the command line, but VS Code is doing it for me. And then I have my regular VS Code Explorer with the all of the files and the solution file and all this stuff. But this is where C# Dev Kit starts to get useful. So what this is just doing is giving me like my file explorer version of this. I'm going to minimize it. And once it realizes that there's a solution or a project in it, C# Dev Kit will pop up the solution explorer window. And then if I'm a .NET developer, right, which I am, especially with MAUI, this is a lot more familiar to me, right? It has the dependencies node. It has right-click actions for like build and rebuild and clean. My XAML C# files are nested under my XAML files, just kind of the things you expect, which is really nice. Yeah. And yeah, it just a little bit cleaner for me, you know. And none of the other files that are in there get ignored if you have that kind of stuff. Like we don't show any of that in the Solution Explorer.
What is VS Code Pets, by the way?
Oh my goodness. VS Code Pets is the best extension. You can create little sprites. If you click on mod, it's the .NET bot, by the way. And then they kind of dance around, and then you can throw a ball, and they catch it. Truly the best extension. I was just at a conference in Swedug in Sweden, amazing conference. And I met the guy, Mark, who has designed a bunch of these sprites, also the Clippy one. And I literally, I think I scared him. I was like, "You're the guy who does the VS Code sprites." And he was like, "I am." And I'm like, "Ah." So anyways, this is VS Code Pets. It is truly the best extension. So, look, he's going to catch it. Good job, Clippy. Oh, mod got him. All right. Anyways.
But we digress.
Okay, so setting this whole thing up. So we have a nice, pretty little walkthrough. So Command-Shift-P, again, command palette. If I do walkthrough, VS Code lets any extension, and there's also built-in walkthroughs. I'm going to scroll for the one that says Get Started with .NET MAUI, and it will show me all of the steps, to get started with it. And so you can just click through these. You have to sign in with your Visual Studio subscription for C# Dev Kit, including Community. So if you don't pay for it, that's fine. You just have to have an account. Make sure that you have .NET installed. So I already had .NET installed on this machine from just downloading it from the website. And you can click on this link. We also install it for you automatically if you want us to do that. And then in the built-in VS Code terminal, we have this beautiful little open terminal button, which I love. Also, Control-Shift backtick is apparently the hotkey, which I never remember. I ran .NET workload install MAUI, right? Which is just how you install workloads from the command line. What's nice is if you're on Windows and you already have Visual Studio, you can just check the MAUI workload and everything plays nicely.
Right.
And then with MAUI, that would be on the Windows side, all I had to do to develop a Windows app. But with MAUI, we also have the Mac and iOS and Android dependencies. So to do that, Mac and iOS is going to be your easiest path on a Mac. All you have to do is go to the App Store and install Xcode, which is the iOS and Mac development tool, right? It takes forever to install. So if you are following along with me right now,
it takes forever to update as well. Oh my goodness.
Does. Yes. Every time there's an update, I'm like, there goes my afternoon. But if you're following along, like pause the video, install Xcode, go watch like 2 episodes of your favorite show, and then come back. And then once Xcode's on, all you have to do is just open it up. Make sure that the Xcode command line tools are installed, which is just a quick command. It's all in our docs. And then you can see the online docs right here. And then that's good. Android is a whole other beast. There are about 8 million ways to install Android. You can download Android Studio, which is Android's native IDE, and it gives you a bunch of nice little helper things. There's actually some extensions I've been using. There's like an Android SDK manager and Android virtual device managers that I've tried out a bunch of these, and a lot of them work really well for kind of managing my Android dependencies without an IDE. But I'm a command line person. So I install the Android command line tools. Oh, you can see my errors. Hold on, Control C. Turning off my emulator. Let's do this. We'll just start a new tab. Shell, new tab. And Android by default on a Mac installs to library. Let me zoom this in too. Nope, this one. I'm just zoom bigger. Oh. By default, it goes to, where am I? Library, Android, and then SDK. Okay. And in the SDK folder, there is a bunch of stuff called the command line tools. You need 7.0. And in the bin is, if you're a command line person, right, you can use the AVD manager and you can use the SDK manager to handle all your Android stuff. So we have the steps for that. If you're not a command line person, you're probably looking at this like, oh my God, I never want to look at this again and I hate you. Have no fear. Android Studio or using Visual Studio for Windows built-in Android managers are great. We also have kind of a quick and dirty command that will install all the Android dependencies for the version of .NET you have. It is in the docs again. So see those, we'll put them in the show notes, but a bunch of different ways. And then the MAUI extension very politely helps you Command-Shift-P, MAUI, check that everything is set up. So configure Android. Just if you have to refresh, it's going to analyze it. And then it should tell you the status down in here. So it's hopefully going to find everything fine. I don't know. But that's a good way to check that everything is sane. So without further ado, let's do the fun stuff. I don't want to look at that anymore. I'm going to open a XAML file. You can open a C# file. You can open a CS Grouch file. And the magic of the MAUI extension all happens with these 2 teeny little curly braces down here. Wow.
Yes.
This is the magic, the MAUI magic. And this is where you can set your starter project. So if you have multiple projects, which one you want to run, and also where you're debugging to. And so pro tip with that little guy down there is you can pin them. And since I'm always switching between different target things, I pin usually my debug target. So you click on it and it opens up here in the command palette, all the different things it finds on your device that you can validly deploy to. So I have everything there. I have a Pixel emulator, a Mac, my Mac locally, and then all of the iPad simulators and iPhone simulators that Xcode brings in. So make sure you install those when you open Xcode. Yeah, now Xcode, you install it, and then you have to open it and then check off and then install a bunch more other stuff. So
in Visual Studio for Windows is the concept of pair to Mac. Is there the same concept here?
So not currently, because there's no way for us to actually remote that back into your Windows machine. But there is remoting built in VS Code. So I could hypothetically pair this VS Code to my Windows VS Code and do all of the coding and building stuff. It's just once you get outside of the VS Code window, right, like to a simulator or something, we can't parrot that over.
So can I on Windows, VS Code with the MAUI extension on Windows, can I build the Mac app taking advantage of the Mac that I have sitting on the same desk?
You can. Yep, you can build it. There's a little bit of magic you have to do on your side to hook it all up, but it
Okay.
does work. I've seen a couple people do it. We
Okay.
also give you the ability, if you just want to build and make sure there's no errors, you can always use the build only command.
I see. Okay.
So that's just like to sanity check that the code will build and run for all the platforms. But
Okay.
you'd have to literally like remote your VS Code over, or in code spaces too. You can do the same thing. So there's nothing on a code space for you to technically deploy to, because the code space is just VS Code. But you can still build and run or connect it locally and all that
Okay.
magic. Anyways, let's start with my Mac. You will see here, like I said, you get some beautiful syntax highlighting and all the auto IntelliSense, whatever you could possibly want. I don't know what else it's going to give me here. There you go. Got my IntelliCode, my little stars. I have all the Roslyn magic. What the one feature I mentioned that we're waiting for is we are fully rebuilding the XAML IntelliSense engine. I'm very excited about it. It is a long time coming. It is going to be part of Roslyn and the LSP like architecture and all of that. But what that means is right now in VS Code, you get like the dumbest IntelliSense known to man. When you start typing, it will literally just search in your file for words that are already in your file and suggest those. So I have found it a little bit difficult to write XAML. There are a couple other extensions. .NET Meteor is great. That has like a very basic XAML autocomplete. So if you want to do that like now, today, but hang tight. XAML IntelliSense is coming very soon.
Okay,
We've
cool.
got all the best people working on it. But just a heads up. Okay, so now what I can do is I can actually run and debug this app. Click on this. And then when I hit run and debug, or I just hit F5, that's the shortcut in all of the Visual Studios and codes to just start debugging your app. It is going to either pick a debugger or automatically pick the correct debugger. It depends on your configuration. If you've used the MAUI extension before, currently there are two. So if I show automatic debug configurations, there are two we have. We have .NET MAUI, and then we have .NET. It will just pop up as C#, but in here it's called Launch C# Project. You want to select MAUI. I know that's weird because MAUI is C#. Soon they will be combined to just C#, so you won't have to see MAUI anymore. But just in case, if you see it separately. But that already built and launched right here on my Mac. This is just our file new app.
Yep.
Click it. There you go. Very fun.
Cool.
Sample. Easy. And then all I have to do to switch over to do this on iOS is just click this again, pick a simulator. I'll do the 15 Pro, because why not? .NET MAUI. Let this build and run. This is going to actually go and find the simulator on my machine and launch it. You can see it's doing the Apple provisioning and signing for me. So this is a question I get a lot too. So I have logged into Xcode with my developer account once. And so it knows that I am an Apple developer. I have an account. For simulators, actually, you don't need to do that. But if I was to ever put it on my physical device, you have to have some kind of Apple developer, blah, blah, blah.
Okay. Even if you don't go through the store, is that right?
Yeah.
Okay.
So they won't let you sideload apps on devices unless they come from like a sane place. And that same place usually involves having a developer account.
Okay.
You don't have to pay for it, though, which is good, just to test things. To ship it, you have to pay for it. That's a whole other thing. So it's taken a second because it's literally like building and packaging and moving it over to the simulator. And then it's loading up the simulator. You see that pops up. Oh, yeah. Magic. It's a slow one today. It's okay. It's later in the day in Boston, so my computer wants to go to bed. Now it has to start the whole thing up, but you'll see the same exact app. And if I launch this on Android and an Android emulator, again, it would be the same exact app. We'll just give it a few seconds to pop up. What else should I show you in here? Am I missing anything exciting from the extension?
What about hot reload? Does it work the same way?
Not yet.
Okay.
Again, soon. But I have seen a lot of people using .NET Watch. And it just kind of magically works. So that's cool. I've also seen people like run it in VS if you're on Windows, and then edit it in VS Code because they like using VS Code better. But as long as VS picks up the file changes, it still magically hot reloads it. I've seen some cool things. Oh my gosh, I should have pre-started the simulator. Sorry.
So you're saying that you run it in Visual Studio, and then while it's running from there, you open the code file in Visual Studio Code, and Visual Studio is smart enough to know that it just reads the file even though something else changed it.
Yeah.
Nice.
So you get to save and all that, but it still works.
Okay. All right, cool.
One thing you will see if you go to settings, so extension settings, is it user settings? Let's find out. We have the experimental C# dev kit. You go to extensions, you go to C# dev kit. Hot reload is starting to work.
Okay.
C# dev kit. Maui's coming soon. We have the extra layer of getting it onto the device or simulator, right, to communicate that. But there's progress being made, and I will shout from the rooftops as soon as it is out.
All right, cool.
But there are settings for all of these separate extensions, right? So like you can go and set your Android stuff, your debug server if you need it, your verbosity. If you're ever having issues with the Maui extension and you don't know why, go to output and then go to the extension here. This I did not know about for the longest time. This is actually telling me like I can update my Android SDK if I'd like.
Oh, cool.
So that's cool. This is like the number one thing when things don't work. I go to this area. Same thing with DevKit, all that. So I'm sure my emulator. Oh yeah, this is well awake by now.
There we go.
Same app. I'm in light mode on this device, and I'm on dark mode on my Mac, which is why this has a white background. The template for Maui automatically light and dark modes for you, which is very nice.
Cool.
Yeah. So that's a lot. If you have any ideas, suggestions, issues, anything, VS Code's report an issue is built in.
Oh,
and you can
nice.
Bug report for an extension for .NET MAUI. And then you type this stuff in here, and what it'll do is you'll hit create on GitHub. It'll pop open a tab pre-filled with all the right tags and everything for it to be a bug filed on Maui. So what's nice about that too is that if you have a bug, you can go and search on Microsoft/.NET Tools -VS Code, something like that. If I hit create, and there are bugs already filed, so you can go and you can see other people's like repros, whatever it is, and pile onto those. So
cool.
Yeah, I think that's it. I think
awesome. So C# dev kit's in release, and the Maui is in preview.
Yep.
And it will be so there is a release version and then a preview version. So what does that mean?
So preview is a tag separate from release and pre-release, which I know is weird.
Yeah.
But we have preview. Everything, no matter what, is preview. But you can switch to release, which ships monthly, or pre-release, which is our weekly build. So every week we ship out updates with bug fixes or whatever it is. Some weeks it's literally just like we're working on testing, we're working on whatever it is. But you can always switch back to release, which is monthly. Either way, it'll say preview.
If you switch back to release, does it still say preview?
It will, yeah. So I should be able to do that, and then it's going to reinstall it. I'll have to reload the window.
Okay.
But it will still say preview at the end. So yeah. And the version changes.
A GA version is soon, I would imagine.
Soonish.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool.
Like I said, XAML IntelliSense is kind of the last thing, and then Hot Reload will come shortly after. But I don't want to hold GA on that. I feel like that's unnecessary to wait.
Yeah.
So I personally cannot write XAML without IntelliSense. This has been the most humbling experience of my life because I forced myself to use VS Code only, and I'm like, oh my god, I don't know how XAML works without Visual Studio telling me how to write XAML.
Yeah.
So we're getting there.
All right. Very cool. So this is really awesome.
Yeah, we have a long way to go. I'm fully aware.
Mhm.
I know the setup is kind of a lot of steps. Like fumbling around in the command line is not what Visual Studio IDE developers really expect, which is fair. And like you said, hot reload is a thing that we all love. Pair to Mac, these kinds of things. But the good news is like the foundation is really solid, and we're really building this fundamentally to be like a VS Code extension, not like we're taking parts of Visual Studio and shoving it into VS Code for fun.
Mhm.
So it's been a really good, chance for us to refactor things and lighten up and make our code better. And the extension's super fast and snappy. And, once all your dependencies are set up, it's been a really good experience.
In a lot of ways, it's cleaner. I mean, Visual Studio for Mac was awesome, but one of the downsides, this is my personal opinion here, the following opinions do not necessarily reflect the opinions of Microsoft, but it wasn't the same. Right. It wasn't the same Visual Studio. Mm-hmm. And I think Visual Studio Code on Windows and Mac is the same Visual Studio Code. Now, it's not the same as Visual Studio, but if I got forced to get really good at Visual Studio Code, I think that'd be a very good thing. Yeah. And then it's the same thing on Windows and Mac. So this is actually, I view this as a positive, personally. Yeah.
And, if you're hiring people who are like JavaScript developers, mm-hmm. they're probably really comfortable with the VS Code-isms, and you put them in VS and they're like, oh my God, I don't know how to fly the plane. So it's like that those people we've seen a lot more comfortable, and then it makes it easier for them to get into .NET because they don't have to learn a new tool chain. They just have to learn C#.
Right. Which is very cool. All right. Thanks so much for coming on and showing this to us.
Thank you for having me. And hopefully I'll be back in like 6 months or something with a bunch of new features to show off again. So we'll see.
Absolutely. Absolutely. All right. We'll put a bunch of links in the show notes, and hope you guys enjoyed this and download it, play with it, and we'll see you next time on Visual Studio Toolbox.